Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update, and today is the 32nd day since the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, massacring 1,400 mostly civilians and wounding thousands of others. In addition, they have also kidnapped more than 240 people, including the majority of which civilians, of course, but also over 30-some children, many of them infants. Joining us here in Jerusalem is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us about the latest?
So the Gaza Strip is about 60 kilometers or 40 miles long, and on the average 6 kilometers or 4 miles wide. The Israeli armored column has cut it in two, practically, with most of the fighting on the ground concentrated on the northern half, which is where the Hamas headquarters is lodged, probably underground. This is where most of the heavier ground action is now concentrated, of course, with a lot of air, naval, and artillery support for the forces. Now, judging by Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements earlier this week, the Israeli government is ready for a deal of a ceasefire in exchange for the hostages' release. He said it, of course, he phrased it negatively, no ceasefire without hostage release. But obviously you can learn the positive. And at the same time, we have more rockets being fired along the northern border, now further south into the Haifa area, more accurate and heavier rockets or missiles, but still, as General Gavish would always emphasize, under the war threshold.
Indeed. Well, let's start with focus on the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip, where IDF forces are heavily embroiled in a ground offensive in collaboration, of course, with the Israeli Air Force and Navy. For that, we have, of course, the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Missile and Air Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. General Gavish, what can you provide us on the operational level at this stage?
Well, yes, thank you, Jonathan. I think it's really important to highlight that in the last 48 hours, we could say that the IDF announced that basically the Gaza Strip was split for two parts. The northern part, when Gaza, of course, city is there, we have the ground maneuver who is heavily there, together with the Israeli Air Force, who is striking Hamas targets, and also, of course, with a close support to the ground forces. Of course, the Navy is also working from east side from the sea, and all of them together are pushing very hard, I would say, on the Hamas, and we see it happening in the last few days, much more in the last 20 to 48 hours. The other thing that was emphasized by the IDF is, of course, the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which this part was and still is allocated for humanitarian, I would say, means for the people of Gaza. So the IDF is continuously asking the citizens of Gaza Strip from the north part to move to the south part. There were more than 1.5 million flyers that were sent out, more than 20,000 calls, direct calls to the people asking them to leave the northern part, going to the south part. And we also learned about some citizens that did it in the last few hours, coming out with the white flags going by foot, going to the south part. So the IDF is opening for them corridors in order for them to be able to move from the northern part to the southern part of Gaza. And of course, we continuously see the efforts of the Hamas in order to block them, because he sees them as his asset and as a human shield. We see this cynical behavior during this war, and mainly in the last 48 hours and even more, when we see that Israel is really asking everyone, pushing them, going to the humanitarian zone in order to save their own lives. So this is for the south part. The last thing, of course, is that although the numbers are lower than it was at the beginning, but still we see some rockets coming from the Gaza Strip toward the Israeli cities, towards Israeli citizens, and most of them are being intercepted by the Israeli air defense, and of course, together with our citizens, which are very disciplined and going to the shelters, we see a very, very low number of hits and people that are injured from those rockets.
Thank you, General Gavish. Also joining us is Major General in Reserve Gershon Ha-Cohen and IDF Army Corps Commander, among others. Thank you for joining us, General. I'd like to ask you also to provide us your insight on the latest vis-a-vis the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip.
The main point is that the Israeli forces succeeding to overcome the basic doctrine of Hamas form of fighting. The basic idea of Hamas, it is the same regarding Hezbollah, based upon three main efforts. The first, very known, the rockets to all ranges, including Tel Aviv. Doesn't matter from Hezbollah or Hamas, they are attacking Tel Aviv. The second effort is the strike of commando to take settlements and military positions in the close front. They actually succeeded quite well for them to achieve that in 7th of October. And the last effort is the defensive effort that was intentionally prepared to bring the IDF into a huge, complicated, fortified area in which the IDF, with all its glory, will just find a catastrophe. To bring the IDF to what happened to the Russian forces in the first weeks in Ukraine. Actually, it means that Hamas cannot really attack Tel Aviv by invading in ground forces to come to Tel Aviv. But their main idea is, due to the fact that they launching rockets to Tel Aviv, they are enforcing the IDF to invade to the depths of Gaza and bring a huge disaster to this offensive operation in well-prepared territory and well-prepared forces to destroy the IDF offensive. Actually, what Israeli forces succeeded to achieve in the last week is to exemplify and to give a proof how relevant and effective they are to do that in a kind of a massive invasion directed to Gaza, much better than what we could just observe in what happened in Bakhmut, in Ukraine, with Wagner forces or Mariupol. Still, it is not really bringing an end to this invasion and this battle. But meanwhile, it is quite going well.
Thank you, General. I'd like immediately also to move to the United States in Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Dr. Mike Doran, the Director of the Middle East Peace and Security Program at the Hudson Institute. Thank you for joining us, sir. You also served, obviously, in the past within the National Security Council as a senior director. And I'd like to ask you from your perspective and experience, how does the United States currently view the complexities presented vis-a-vis the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip?
Well, this entire war has been a huge challenge for the Biden administration because it refutes their basic understanding of how they were going to bring stability to the Middle East, which was by reaching an accommodation with Iran. And so they were, with their left hand, they were building up Iran through these turning a blind eye to Iranian oil sales to China, by refusing to contest Iranian conventional military power in places like Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and by basically reaching an accommodation on the nuclear program as well. They have learned now that this is going to be a huge problem for them, but they haven't made the paradigm shift and really seen this as an Iranian-U.S. contest, which is, I think, how it really should be understood in Washington. Iran, if you think about the Middle East as a kind of series of tables, of diplomatic tables, there's a table for Iraq, there's a table for Syria, there's a table for Gaza. There's also a high table above all of those. Iran wants to put itself on the high table with the United States, and it has done that with the nuclear program. The United States sits, negotiates with Iran, and doesn't let Saudi Arabia or Israel or any other power sit at the high table with us. Iran sees in this contest an opportunity to put itself on the high table in other respects. With the hostages in Gaza, it's taking some of the hostages under their wing and negotiating with the United States. As we're talking right now, Amos Hochstein has landed in Lebanon, where he's going to be negotiating indirectly, but very much clearly with Hezbollah. What is that about? What's he negotiating with them about? The other thing that puts them on the high table with the Americans are their direct attacks on the Americans happening all across the region. And if you've listened carefully to what the Americans are saying about this, or what the Iranians are saying about this, the Iranians are saying the United States is being attacked because it's supporting Israel in Gaza. The United States is saying, oh, we make a distinction between what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in Syria and Iraq. It's nonsensical. So the problem for the Biden administration is, at what point do they feel that the pressure on them, political pressure from the left wing, which doesn't support Israel, and military pressure from Iran is going to compel them to bring a humanitarian ceasefire, to pressure Israel for a humanitarian ceasefire? That's where I think the Israelis have to be most conscious, is that the pressure on them is going to grow before they can achieve their military goals.
Thank you, sir. Indeed. I'd like to make a couple of points. The first point, on the operational level, I think that it is quite impressive what the IDF has achieved, neutralizing effectively Hamas's capacity to truly challenge the IDF in its strong game. Basically, what Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, announced to be the stronghold that, or the security fortress of Hamas, namely Gaza City. All of the tactical advantages that he thought he had are actually being null and void. Particularly, the tunnels are being rendered ineffective at this stage, including the shoulder-propelled missiles, or RPGs in layman's terms, ultimately are also rendered as ineffective, considering the fact that Israel has very capable technologies, particularly Windbreaker, which eliminates any threats to the tanks. There were only 2 malfunctions recorded, at least publicly, with regard to any instances where Hamas was successful in firing RPG missiles. But other than that, even from zero range, they're able to thwart capabilities to really harm the tanks, which continue to operate irrespective of Hamas's attempts to thwart the advance. And another point, and that is very impressive, the collaboration between the ground forces, the Navy, and the Air Force in particular, with just... And intelligence, of course, intelligence in live capacity. We see much of that being implemented in live, and seeing how this pretty much overwhelms Hamas, which we already see splinters of Hamas starting to crumble, the leadership very frustrated with its inability to effectively prevent the IDF from advancing, and that is something that we should take note of, meaning that the advance is full force, despite the fact that the IDF doesn't imply even half of its firepower, which obviously speaks volumes. Let's turn to the Northern Front. Mr. Oren, set the stage for us.
Well, you can't separate the Northern Front from the Southern Front. This is, of course, not Gaza, where you can and did split the strip. The classic question is whose side is time on, which is better phrased as who's better using time. And up to now, and due to the support Hezbollah has given Hamas by keeping this front active and having Israel keep many, if not most, of its reserves over there, as well as the Air Force in readiness, Hamas has been using time better than Israel. And both of our general officer guests have commanded at all levels, from platoon to corps, from battery to wing. And it is always the inclination of commanders to try and work methodically. They have a plan. They don't want to be rushed because this can put the plan out of joint, cause problems between various forces. But nevertheless, Israel must hasten its action in Gaza, even at the price of not being so well oiled as it has been up to now, because the international and mostly American pressure on it to get a ceasefire will stop it in place before it gets to Sinwar. So it should reassess its position and work faster.
Let's turn immediately to General Gavish and ask him for his operational perspective currently vis-a-vis the Hezbollah-controlled Lebanese territory.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, we are still under the war threshold in the northern arena. We say it all the time, as Amir mentioned, but this is really the situation. We saw in the last few hours that the Hezbollah was trying to shoot an unmanned vehicle toward Israel. And this was intercepted even before crossing the border by the Israeli air and missile defense. So we continuously see those trials with some rockets, UAVs, anti-tank units. But once again, we saw it in the last 2 hours, but we see it basically in all the encounters between Israel and the Hezbollah. The IDF is winning all those encounters. The rockets are being intercepted, the UAVs are intercepted, and most of the anti-tank units, some of them even before shooting toward Israel. So we continuously see it in the northern border, but again and again, and maybe in a way this is also referring to what was mentioned by Amir. I think that the IDF is fully prepared to any escalation in the northern arena. Although we see the position of the Hezbollah in the last few weeks, we don't take any chances. We are not going to be surprised again. It was one time was enough. So the IDF is fully forced there, and they would do whatever is necessary if this war would escalate, of course.
Thank you, General Gavish. I'd like immediately also to turn to General Ha-Cohen. General Ha-Cohen, we've communicated about the Lebanese AOR plenty of times. Obviously, Israel currently regards the Northern Front as one front, both Lebanon and Syria, from which Israel needs to contend with the Islamic Republic of Iran, since Hezbollah obviously is the extension of the RGC and its Quds force, a very sizable force, but there are additional Iranian proxies in Syria. And therefore, I'd like to ask you to provide us some insight on the northern challenge, but also on the eastern challenge and the southern challenge, considering the fact that Iran is also very much in place to widen the conflict from Iraq, from Yemen, and elsewhere, threatening Israel and U.S. forces throughout this region.
course, Iran directing all these efforts mainly in the northern front, including forces, militia forces from Iraq, to bring them to Syria. Maybe their main idea is to create a new surprise by attacking Israel from Syria or from the border between Syria and Jordan. And we must take all scenarios in a very, very serious preparation. But just in order to realize what's the meaning of all these threats, the main achievement of Hezbollah and Iranian until now is the fact that along the northern border, all the Jewish Israeli settlements just are uprooted. The people are not there. They became refugees, really. And the way to bring them back, really demanding Israel to solve the threat, to do something with the Hezbollah threat that could, in 5 minutes, attack Metula, for example, with a commando battalion, what they are calling Radwan. Civilians cannot live in daily life under such a threat. So meanwhile, they have their own achievements. They really not taking a kind of symmetric equitation between the fact that our settlements are empty and the fact that a lot of villages in the Lebanese side are also empty. It is not making the same influence. Right now, Israeli government must deal with more than 150,000 refugees. And it is a weapon against Israel that must be come to an end somehow by solving the threat in the border. So right now, as Hezbollah leader said, Nasrallah, the main word in his speech, long speech, more than 1 hour, was that the scenario is open. Open, it means not only by considerations of space and time, it is open also by realizing that God himself yet not determined the main idea what will be the end of that story. So it is still waiting to a decision. And it means we must be well prepared for an escalation.
Unfortunately, from what I see on the Israel-Lebanese border, we can clearly see that Hezbollah is probing IDF defenses, continuously trying to understand, obviously, what are the challenges at hand. And at a moment in time when Hezbollah, under the directives and blessing of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it would seek to escalate this war further. I'd like to immediately also turn to Mike, Dr. Doran. The situation right now in the Middle East is so complex since Central Command, which has been an exemplary force of deterrence against the Islamic Republic of Iran, despite a relatively weak foreign policy of the United States, irrespective of a few glimpses of American pride that was the case of the past. Where is currently the chief focus that you think should be touched upon, considering the fact that we are not in a position where the United States can just lead from behind as the Obama administration would have liked to?
They haven't made that shift. The Americans have a doctrine, and this is not just the Biden administration, it's also the military, whereby they do not provide offensive countermeasures to their allies against Iran. They provide purely defensive measures, meaning integrated missile defense. That is their great holy grail. That won't work. You have to carry out offensive countermeasures against Iran. And I think we should start from the point of view of what would Tehran's definition of victory be in this competition, in this war that Israel's in right now. And I completely agree with General Ha-Cohen, as usual. They will regard it as a victory if Hamas retains some military ability in the south of the Gaza Strip. Even if they have to give up the north of the Gaza Strip, as long as they retain some military capability, some ability to send rockets against Israel. If the Israeli population is depopulated in the Gaza envelope, if the Israeli population is depopulated in the north, as General Ha-Cohen said, and I think what they really want to do, Hezbollah, is change the rules of engagement to go back to the pre-2006 era, where you can have tit for tat constantly without fear of a massive Israeli escalation. They want that because that will always give them the ability to turn up the heat and turn it down, and it will depopulate the north. Look at what just happened last week. And one of the themes of Nasrallah's speech was that, yes, we're not escalating right now. We're not going for a knockout blow. We have to be patient, but all options are on the table. And our focus is on the Americans. We're going to bring pressure on the Americans, and they're going to pressure the Israelis. He said it pretty much explicitly. And what happens? He snaps his fingers, and Amos Hochstein shows up. This is a pattern the Israelis need to really absorb in their minds, because it's the same pattern that preceded the Maritime Border Agreement, which in essence was an American negotiation with Iran about Israeli power. The Israelis don't tend to see it because they're in a bear hug. The Americans put them in a bear hug, and toward Zionist audiences in the United States and toward the Israelis, they say, we love Israel, we love Israel, we love Israel. Look at all the support we're giving it. But to the Iranians and to the anti-Zionists in the Democratic Party, they say, we're restraining Israel, we're restraining Israel, we're restraining Israel. And that's why you get this weird messaging of, we support Israel, but there has to be a humanitarian pause, and so on. They're negotiating with the Iranians and with Hezbollah about the humanitarian pause on you. You have to foil American policy.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Gavish, General Ha-Cohen, and Dr. Doran for taking out of your times to update us on the latest. I'd like also to thank Mr. Oren, of course. And I'd like to also highlight that we are aware, despite the complexities of the vast support for the State of Israel from the majorities in various Western democracies, but your voice counts. Therefore, I encourage you, contact your representative, contact your regional leader, your national leader, send in letters, and make sure that they know that your support for them is also contingent on their support for Israel, which will make a substantive change in the way foreign policy may also be directed towards Israel. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today. Tonight, we will have both TV7 Israel News at 9 p.m., as well as after that, we will be hosting here both families, relatives of hostages that are currently being held in Gaza, as well as people who survived the massacre of October 7th as part of Jerusalem Studio at 9:30 p.m. Jerusalem time. Until then, shalom from Jerusalem.
I'm Eran, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.